The courtroom was tense, the air heavy with anticipation, as YNW Bortlen faced a crucial turning point in his double murder case. For months, his legal team had been pushing hard to suppress key pieces of evidence, documents, witness accounts, and even digital trails that prosecutors insisted were critical to proving their case. Bortlen's defense argued that this evidence was flawed, unfairly obtained, or misleading. If the judge had agreed, it could have been a massive win for the rapper, perhaps even a game-changer in the trial's outcome. But when the decision finally came down, it was devastating for Bortlen. The judge denied his motion to strike the evidence, ruling that the material would remain in play as the trial moves forward. The verdict sent shockwaves through the courtroom, rattling Bortlen's supporters and leaving prosecutors emboldened. Almost immediately, the news spread like wildfire across social media. Fans and critics clashed online, some claiming the system was stacked against him, while others argued that justice was finally closing in. What was supposed to be a quiet legal maneuver had turned into a headline-grabbing twist that could shape the rest of the case. So what exactly happened inside that courtroom? What evidence is so explosive that Bortlen wanted it gone at all costs? And what does this decision mean for his future and for the legacy of the entire YNW crew? Let's break down the drama, the stakes, and the secrets behind this shocking legal defeat. The courtroom had all the makings of a movie scene. Reporters filled the benches, pens poised over notepads, while supporters and critics of YNW Bortlen sat shoulder to shoulder, waiting to hear the fate of his latest legal gamble. Bortlen himself, dressed sharp but looking restless, kept glancing at the door as if expecting someone else to walk in and change everything. But this time, the only person who mattered was the judge, and when she entered, the room fell into an eerie silence. For weeks, Bortlen's defense team had been hammering. At one point, the evidence the prosecution was planning to present was unreliable. They argued that certain digital records were tainted, that witness statements were contradictory, and that police mishandled parts of the investigation. Their motion asked the judge to strike down entire categories of evidence. If successful, it could have gutted the case against him. The defense opened with fire, insisting the prosecution was trying to paint Bortlen as guilty before the trial even began. They pointed to inconsistencies in how data was collected, questioned the credibility of key witnesses, and claimed that the state was building its case on smoke and mirrors. One lawyer even turned to the gallery at one point, declaring, "If this evidence is allowed, it's not just an attack on my clients, it's an attack on justice itself." But prosecutors were prepared. They countered each point with painstaking detail, producing chain of custody logs, technical experts, and sworn affidavits. To them, this wasn't about theatrics, it was about the facts. And the facts, they argued, pointed directly to YNW Bortlen's involvement in the murders. This evidence is not just admissible, one prosecutor declared. It is central to understanding what happened and who was responsible. The tension built with every objection, every counterargument, every raised eyebrow from the judge. Spectators whispered about what was at stake. If the judge granted Bortlen's motion, it would cripple the prosecution's case and give his team a massive boost heading into trial. But if the judge denied it, Bortlen would have to face the very evidence he feared most, evidence that prosecutors said could tie him directly to the crime as the arguments dragged on. Bortlen sat stiffly at the defense table, occasionally leaning over to whisper to his attorneys. His jaw clenched when prosecutors described certain digital messages. His eyes narrowed when they mentioned witness testimonies. And every time the judge scribbled notes, his leg bounced under the table like a drumbeat only he could hear. Finally, after hours of debate, the moment came. The judge shuffled her papers, adjusted her glasses, and delivered her ruling. The entire courtroom leaned forward. Her words were measured but firm. The defense's motion was denied. The evidence would stand. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Bortlen's supporters looked crushed, some shaking their heads in disbelief. On the other side of the room, prosecutors exchanged tight smiles, knowing they had just scored a major victory. Bortlen himself leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if trying to keep his emotions locked away where no one could see outside the courthouse. The reaction was immediate. Cameras and microphones swarmed attorneys from both sides. The defense tried to spin the outcome, insisting this was just one battle in a long war. "We respect the court's ruling," one lawyer said, "but we remain confident that the truth will come out at trial." The prosecution, meanwhile, spoke with renewed confidence, calling the judge's decision a step toward justice for the victims. On social media, hashtags like #YNWBORTLEN and #DoubleMurderCase shot to the top of trending lists. Supporters flooded Twitter with messages of encouragement, while critics declared the decision a sign that the walls were finally closing in. Memes, commentary videos, and fiery debates filled Instagram and YouTube. For fans of the YNW crew, it wasn't just about the lit, it was about loyalty, betrayal, and the legacy of a music movement that had already been rocked by scandal. For Bortlen, though the reality was simple, the evidence he wanted gone wasn't going anywhere. And now, he would have to face it all when the trial began. The denial of Bortlen's motion didn't just change the courtroom dynamic, it changed the entire tone of the case. For the first time, the public began to see glimpses of the evidence that prosecutors were holding. And the more details leaked, the more people understood why Bortlen's defense team had fought so hard to get it. Thrown out at the center of it all were digital records. Investigators had combed through phone logs, text messages, and location data, piecing together a timeline that prosecutors claimed placed Bortlen at the heart of the crime. According to them, the metadata was damning. Call records that aligned too neatly with critical moments, GPS pings that contradicted earlier alibis, and encrypted messages that hinted at coordination. The defense insisted the data was flawed, taken out of context, or simply misunderstood. They argued that apps glitch, GPS locations drift, and messages can be misinterpreted. But the prosecution countered with experts, data analysts who explained to the judge how the information was verified and why it couldn't be so easily dismissed. Then there were witness statements. A handful of people whose identities were being closely guarded claimed to have seen or heard things that night details that, if true, tied directly back to Bortlen. One witness reportedly described seeing cars meeting in an unusual location. Another mentioned conversations overheard in the days leading up to the crime. For the defense, these accounts were hearsay, unreliable, and inconsistent. But for prosecutors, they were puzzle pieces snapping into place. Perhaps the most explosive detail, though, was the forensic evidence. Ballistics reports and physical samples linked to the crime scene were expected to be central in trial. While the defense suggested contamination and chain of custody issues, prosecutors assured the court that their evidence was solid. If admitted, it could provide a physical bridge between Bortlen and the murders, something his legal team knew would be devastating. As the specifics trickled into the public eye, fans of the YNW crew erupted. Social media became a battleground. On Twitter, hashtags like #FreeBortlen and #JusticeForTheVictims clashed daily. Some fans argued that the system was determined to make an example out of him, pointing to systemic bias and high-profile nature of the case. Others insisted the evidence spoke for itself and that no amount of celebrity should protect someone from accountability. On Instagram and TikTok, clips of courtroom sketches went viral, turned into memes with captions like, "When the judge says no," and Bortlen looking at the evidence like. YouTube commentators uploaded hour-long breakdowns, some defending him passionately, others declaring the trial as good as over. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere grew darker. Sources close To the case whispered that the prosecution had even more evidence waiting in reserve, information they hadn't yet revealed to the public. Defense attorneys, meanwhile, scrambled to prepare counterarguments, vowing to discredit every piece once the trial began. The impact on Bortlen himself was visible. In court, he carried himself with a mix of defiance and weariness. To supporters, his sharp suits and steady gaze showed resilience. But those who watched closely noticed the small cracks, the way his hands trembled slightly when certain messages were read aloud, the clenched jaw when witnesses were mentioned, the long, heavy exhales as his lawyers scribbled notes in frantic whispers. For the families of the victims, the judge's decision felt like a small but important step toward closure. Representatives issued statements thanking the court for recognizing the importance of keeping the evidence intact. They insisted they weren't looking for vengeance, just the truth. Whatever it may be, the bigger question looming over everyone, though, was simple. What happens next? If the evidence was strong enough to survive the defense's most aggressive attempt to strike it down, what would happen when jurors finally saw it? Would they be swayed by the prosecution's narrative? Or would the defense succeed in planting seeds of doubt? One thing was clear: Bortlen's attempt to rewrite the story had failed. The evidence he feared most was now locked into the trial, and for both his supporters and his critics, the stage was set for a courtroom showdown unlike any other, with the judge's ruling echoing across news headlines. The entire case entered a new, more dangerous phase. No longer was the fight about motions and paperwork. Now it was about survival in front of a jury. For YNW Bortlen, the clock was ticking. Every piece of evidence he'd tried to bury was now set to resurface in vivid detail. And his legal team knew the trial was going to be a brutal, high-stakes battle. In the weeks that followed, the courtroom turned into a war zone of preparation. Prosecutors tightened their case, organizing the mountain of evidence into a narrative they believed would convince jurors beyond a reasonable doubt. They rehearsed how to present the phone logs in a way that felt ironclad, how to make the witness testimonies feel credible, and how to use the ballistics reports to tie everything together. Their strategy was simple: overwhelm with facts, cut through the noise, and keep the focus on the victims. Bortlen's defense team, meanwhile, worked just as tirelessly. They pored over every detail of the evidence, looking for cracks, anything that could suggest tampering, error, or bias. Their strategy wasn't to deny everything outright, but to create doubt. Reasonable doubt, they reminded themselves, was the key. If even one juror questioned the chain of custody, the reliability of the data, or the credibility of a witness, they could save their client. The atmosphere in Bortlen's inner circle shifted dramatically. Friends who once posted carefree photos on social media now spoke in hushed tones about loyalty and betrayal. The YNW brand, already tarnished by the ongoing saga, faced even deeper scrutiny. Music blogs debated whether the crew's reputation could ever recover, while fans flooded comment sections demanding new music as if the trial were just another publicity stunt. The line between art and reality had blurred to the point of no return. Inside the courthouse, rumors swirled. Some claimed prosecutors had even more damning evidence waiting in reserve: surveillance footage, financial records, or unreleased testimony. Others whispered that members of Bortlen's own circle were being pressured to cooperate. Every day brought new speculation, and with every headline, the pressure on Bortlen mounted. The rapper himself seemed caught between two worlds. In court, he maintained a steady composure, his eyes often locked forward, jaw clenched, giving little away. But outside, in rare glimpses caught by paparazzi, he looked worn down, as though the weight of the case was crushing him. Supporters who once shouted his name now watched with unease, unsure if their loyalty would be rewarded or betrayed, as trial preparations intensified. The judge issued stern warnings to both sides: no theatrics, no media leaks, no stunts. In a case this big, those warnings fell on deaf ears. Prosecutors gave carefully worded interviews emphasizing their confidence, while defense attorneys promised to expose the truth behind the so-called evidence. The media devoured every soundbite, turning each statement into a headline that fueled the fire. The families of the victims, meanwhile, stood firm. They attended hearings quietly, their presence a constant reminder of the lives lost. For them, this wasn't about fame, music, or fan debates, it was about justice. And as the trial drew closer, their voices grew louder, insisting that the case was about more than one man's fate. It was about accountability. Then came the moment that set social media ablaze. Leaked reports that prosecutors planned to call a surprise witness whose testimony could change everything. No one knew who it was, but speculation ran wild. Was it a former friend turned informant? A witness who had stayed silent until now? Or someone with inside knowledge that could shatter the defense's narrative? Hashtags like #MysteryWitness and #Bortlen trial dominated timelines, keeping the case in the public eye day and night. By now, the courtroom drama had taken on the weight of a cultural moment. This wasn't just about Bortlen anymore, it was about the intersection of fame, loyalty, crime, and justice. Every development was magnified, every reaction dissected, every silence interpreted as meaning something more. As jury selection loomed, both sides sharpened their blades. Prosecutors promised a clear and compelling case that would leave no room for doubt. The defense vowed to expose the flaws in the state's story, painting Bortlen as a man caught in the web of circumstance. The stage was set for a trial that would decide not just his future, but the narrative of the entire YNW legacy. And through it all, one truth lingered in the background. By losing the fight to strike the evidence, Bortlen had lost control of the story. The courtroom would now decide what was real, what was rumor, and what was justice. Justice. For fans, critics, and everyone caught in between. One thing was clear. The trial ahead wouldn't just be a legal proceeding, would be a spectacle. One that could either redeem YNW Bortlen or seal his fate forever. YNW Bortlen's legal gamble may have failed, but the story is far from over, with the judge's ruling keeping the most critical evidence in play. The trial ahead is shaping up to be one of the most dramatic courtroom battles the hip-hop world has ever witnessed. For Bortlen, every move from here on out will be under the microscope. His words, his actions, and the strategies of his legal team will determine whether he walks free or spends decades behind bars. The fans are split. The media is circling, and prosecutors are preparing to lay everything bare. But one question still hangs heavy in the air. Will the jury see YNW Bortlen as a man unfairly targeted by a system eager to punish him, or as someone who can no longer outrun the evidence stacked against him? This case isn't just about legal motions or court filings, it's about legacy, loyalty, and the razor-thin line between fame and downfall. And as the trial unfolds, the world will be watching every twist and turn. But now, it's your turn. What do you think about the judge's decision? Was this a devastating blow to Bortlen's defense, or just another hurdle in a long fight for his freedom? And do you believe the evidence prosecutors are holding is as strong as they claim? Or will the defense find a way to tear it all apart when the trial begins? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The real drama is only just beginning.